I'm going to introduce this panel as a turning point panel in the sense that the turning point in terms of this afternoon and the workshop here. The first part has been looking at results. Craig gave us a very useful synthesis of results. I think we have learned quite a bit. I was surprised, in fact, at how much we have learned. I didn't realize that working sort of in the fog of the battle, we were more systematic and cumulative in obtaining results than what we have done. And second, we now need to kind of look forward as to where do we go from here. We have learned we need to define new research directions. We are also at a turning point in terms of the research itself. We had a first phase of ATAI support from the Gates Foundation. This is coming to an end. We are in discussions as to how to renew this grant, but we need to sort of take stock of what has been done, what are the new issues which are emerging, what is it that we have not done, what is it that we could be doing. And so this panel is very important to us in terms of helping us learn from what has been done, learning from what they are doing, and hearing from them what do they suggest that we should be doing. I think there's a constant in terms of past work and future work, which is the quality of the work, the rigor of the approach. You have seen that a lot of this work is under a randomized controlled trial approach. This is bringing science to the field. This is helping us make sure that we are talking about causalities. This helps us understand and measure impact. This allows results-based management. This allows us to experiment with different alternatives. So there's something very new, really revolutionary in terms of the way we do development work today. And I think the One Acre Fund example is a really good one as to how this is brought to the field in a useful fashion, which is we take rigorous science to the field. We do randomized controlled trials experiment. We collect data. We do rigorous analysis. And that allows us to talk with confidence about causalities. I think there is a hypothesis that I'd like to put forward to the panel, which is maybe we have not paid enough attention about markets. Marshall and Marcel just talked to us about situations where markets really don't work as well as we think. And maybe the fact that we have a lot of local non-tradability in what is being produced plays against the sustained adoption of technology, and I'm going to make the case before I let the panel talk. We have 4 members in the panel. Richard Caldwell, the first next to me, from the Gates Foundation, a program officer, a member of the board of ATAI, lots of experience in development, worked for USAID for a long time, worked in Senegal and other parts of Africa. Second, Ian Yadigaroglu, who is the next to last here. Ian is a Berkeley product, has a PhD from Stanford. This is the private sector. He works in an investment group, the Capricorn Investment Group. Large farms, FDI, agriculture, trying to reconcile efficiency with social purpose and environmental sustainability. A lot to learn from you, so thank you for coming. Min Le from Oxfam has been working at the FAO, working at the World Bank, working with DFID, tremendous experience. Oxfam America has been key in terms of smallholder farmers advocacy. She's worked very importantly in Vietnam on issues of economic justice. So we look forward to hearing from you as well. And then finally, David Ameyo from the working at AGRA. Tremendous experience as well in different parts of the world, from Haiti to Africa, works with Kofi Annan. AGRA is probably one of the most important initiatives to bring technology, bring a green revolution to Africa, a huge challenge. And indeed, if this can be done, we can see a lot of difference being made, not only in terms of growth, but also in terms, and mainly in terms of poverty in Africa. So let me start with a few propositions to introduce the issue. What we know is that there has been real progress lately in Africa. We should not look at Africa as a stagnant continent. This is not the case. The last 15 years have been incredible in terms of economic growth. This has been the fastest growing region of the world. The thing is, it has been driven by largely mineral exports. And hence, what we see is a combination of growth but failure to diminish poverty, urbanization without corresponding employment creation, the rise of urban slums, and the displacement, in a sense, of poverty from rural to urban. And we need to, in a sense, question the model of growth. We need to have a growth which is going to be more inclusive, more employment creating. And I think what we have learned is that the strategy to do this is to, of course, take advantage of the mineral exports in terms of income generation, foreign exchange generation, and infrastructure construction. But what we need to do is to push agriculture. It has to be inclusive. It has to take into account the presence of smallholder farmers. It has to generate employment and income for them. And this is how growth and poverty are going to be reconciled. So let me show you a few graphs that are going to build on what Craig talked about this morning. I think this graph is a fantastic way of describing the problem. This is the horse race between horizontal expansion and vertical expansion, between area and yields. What you can see vertically is that the East Asia has mainly grown in terms of yields. South Asia, the same. Latin America started horizontally, namely a lot of horizontal expansion, new area being brought into production, and then turning vertically to the increase in yields. And you see sub-Saharan Africa, right? Basically, output growth has been obtained via horizontal expansion. The problem is that lands are limited, especially land for smallholder farmers. And if you look at farm size, what you see is that there has been a continuing decline in farm size, high population growth, the denominator that Andrew was talking about or answering a question about. And as a consequence, what we need to do for Africa, this is what Attai has been pursuing as an objective, is technology adoption, technological change in agriculture. At the same time, where are we in terms of yields, technological change in Africa? What you see is that the latest figures going to 2012 are still situations where the yields in Africa have been relatively stagnant compared to what has been happening in other parts of the world. So in spite of growth, in spite of success stories that you have been hearing, the aggregate impact is still not visible, and the challenge remains with us. In terms of fertilizer use, as Andrew was saying, one of the easiest ways of raising yields is fertilizer use, and you can see that even to the latest figures, sub-Saharan Africa remains lagging behind with 30 kg per hectare of fertilizer being used, as opposed to 313 in East Asia, an enormous gap that has to be understood and certainly remains as a challenge to us. Right? So how do we explain the puzzle of low yields? Attai has made an important contribution in exploring different dimensions of the determinants of adoption, especially new seeds and fertilizers, availability of technology, profitability of technology, as to whether this is the case or not. In many situations, farmers are producing in very distant locations from markets. Many countries are landlocked. Transaction costs are very high. Price ratios between product and inputs are unfavorable to producers. And as a consequence, there's a huge profitability issue. Information and learning, we have seen different aspects of this, the role of social networks that Jeremy has been talking about, access to credit, access to insurance, and then different aspects of behavior, which I think have come up very importantly on the table, that we cannot assume that people behave in a rational fashion. The use of nudges is quite important to help people help themselves, to fight the tendency to procrastinate or the tendency to succumb to the consumption patterns which sort of leave behind the essential needs in terms of health and education. Now, what we need to look is beyond this, is to look at the dynamics of markets, and I think this is what the panel is going to take on. And the question here is whether we have inelastic or elastic demand. And what has just been discussed in terms of the Wernicke Fund is to show that if you have success in terms of credit, then what you do is you allow markets to perform better. You are going to smooth the price across the seasons. What we see is that in many situations, so this is the contrast between inelastic and elastic demand. If you have inelastic demand, you have technological change, the supply function shifts, prices collapse. So farmers do not gain, consumers benefit via lower prices. If you have, on the right-hand side, a more elastic demand, there is demand towards the international market, there is access to the cities, to supermarkets, to agro-processors and agro-exporters. You have a sustained demand for the product, supply shifts, prices are not affected, and consumers gain. So the suspicion here is whether, in fact, markets are there to absorb the benefits of technological change, and whether more attention needs to be paid to markets, market creation, in order to be able to sustain the profitability of technology adoption in the face of technological change. Here is our price data on in Niamey, and what you see is the top one is rice, which is imported, traded. There can be good or bad weather years. You see stable prices, but you look by contrast at millet and manioc, and what you see is this tremendous price instability as a consequence of weather, which is a good symptom of the fact that markets tend not to work. How to create markets, infrastructure, make markets work better, information, what Marcel was talking about in terms of the use of IT, contracts in value chains, and we are going to hear this, I think, from some of the work with the Gates Foundation. So growth corridors, there are two phenomena that I think will be on the table for discussion. The first one is the presence of large farms and whether large farms and small farms can be reconciled in terms of social impacts and environmental impacts. And the second is the fact that the growth of Africa is really mining export driven, where the mining products are really bulky products like coal that requires heavy transportation capacity. And so what we see is throughout Africa, the construction of what we call growth corridors, which are opening new areas for farming, which are opening access to markets for areas that were basically landlocked previously, right? And this is where there's a role potentially for large farms that can put those areas into production, but then the question is how do large and small farms partner together in such a fashion that the small farmers derive a benefit from what large farmers are introducing. So let me just finish with some questions. How to accelerate the growth of agriculture? Growth has been basically mining driven in the last few years. How can we put agriculture back on the table? How to include smallholder farmers so that we derive social benefits and poverty reduction from the gains in agriculture? How to give a role to the large farmers so that the large farmers be actually an engine of social change and environmental conservation and not looked at as sort of the enemy to be exposed. And finally, how do we take advantage of mineral exports in such a fashion that there is a complementarity between infrastructure and mining, the emergence of mining towns as sources of effective demand, and a response on the side of agriculture. So let me now turn to the panel, and I'm going to ask Richard, would you like to start? They will each take up to, say, 10 minutes, and then maybe we'll have a brief second round in terms of responding to each other's within the panel. So Richard, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Alain. Is that on? First off, a little disclaimer. I've in the last couple of years, I've transformed myself from a researcher to just a plain bureaucrat. So I'm not sure how much insight I'm going to have. I'm not going to respond, at least in the first round, to the large, small farmer paradigm, but I think that's a very interesting one. But first I would have to figure out a way to go back to the Gates Foundation and start talking about large farms, because our focus has always been on smallholder farmers, and I think it's an interesting discussion, though, that we need to have. First off, let me say that we've spent about the agricultural strategy at the Gates Foundation started in 2006, really didn't get off the ground until about 2008. Since then, we've spent about $1 billion in agricultural research. The Gates Foundation is actually the largest funder of agricultural research in the world. Next, I think second is the government of France, and only third. This is for international development. I think third is the U.S. government. But we've always been structured not only on the research and development side, but also downstream on the market and access side. And I think Alain's statement in this paper that I read, that markets matter, I think is really true. And it's really, really important for what we do. But I would say that we've terribly underinvested on the downstream side, and I don't think we've overinvested on the upstream side. That's what keeps Umesh employed. But I do think that there has to be a better balance. Now, we have made a bunch of changes that actually coincide with your thinking here. Even as short of time as a year ago, we were very siloed. So we had a research and development division that worked on agricultural research upstream all the way from discovery. We're trying to see if we can change rice, for example, from a C3 to from a C3 to a C4 crop. We're doing a lot of sort of blue sky research, and we've invested a lot in agricultural technologies, mainly improvement of plant varieties. A year ago, the R&D people who do that work in the foundation would likely not have to talk to the people in markets who actually were making investments like Purchase for Progress through WFP to see how can we aggregate small farmer production into something that gets a good price and can serve larger markets. We were investing a lot actually on the cash crop side in terms of marketing, very little on the staple crop side. In the past year, we've actually made a huge transformation internally to basically bring markets and researchers and policy people together. People know this as sort of matrix type of management, but now if you make an R&D investment, for example, Strasse, the stress-tolerant rice investment, they would have to actually go really get money and agreement from the markets people about how that investment is going to be made and what impact would the market side have. We've also gone to much more of a value chain approach, and again, trying to foster more collaboration among people on our side who actually make the investments. And so I think it's terribly important. I think it's very timely that we actually start opening these discussions up a little bit more about what impact will technology production and promotion have on markets. And I must say vice versa too. I think the opposite question is still important. When I worked in Senegal, we had an investment from USAID called Millet Transformation. And we had a food science technologist in Senegal for several years. It's actually the person who invented bacon bits, but I wouldn't hold that against him. But they spent years coming up with products that could incorporate millet into basically more downstream in the value chain. And one of the more successful products was actually putting millet flour into French baguettes. And we found through marketing studies, you could get about 14 or 15% millet flour into baguettes, and they were still accepted on the market, and people would still purchase them. Above that, the taste and quality of the bread changed so that you couldn't. But it all seemed pretty well, and so we talked to millers, and we got millers to actually agree to buy these products. But in fact, and it worked out really well for the first year, and then the second year, thanks to the weather, the production of millet crashed. So we actually couldn't guarantee the supply. So the market was there, but the supply wasn't. And so the millers basically refused to carry the project on because they had to make fixed cost investments. If they couldn't guarantee the supply every year, then it didn't work for them. So it's not only markets matter, but not only certainly the output markets, but the input markets as well. So I think we're making strides in the foundation to align our funding to take into account more of the market side as well as the R&D side. Do I have any time left? The other thing I'd like to say quickly is data matters as well. And so we're investing a lot in data, not only through the data we generate through these types of investment like a TIE, but we're also actually trying to work more on big data, bringing a lot of the private sector players into play. We're getting agreements with Esri, for example, who probably owns about 80% of the GIS market around the world. We're getting agreements with Digital Globe, who is one of the largest suppliers of satellite photos. And we're trying to get all these groups to talk together, create data standards. And I mentioned this because I think one of the more intriguing things in Alain's paper was tracking, for example, some very simple indicators like this ratio of the amount of grain it takes to purchase 1 kg of fertilizer. If we can get simple indicators that can actually give us intelligence about how markets are working, and we can make those operate in real time or near real time, and then incorporate that with other data, like from CDR data, from call records, from other satellite data, from survey data, I think we can actually start to get better, much better at more real-time diagnostic work about how markets are functioning, and also things like the adoption rates of the technologies that we're putting out there. And so I think both of those areas about, one, a more focus on markets, and two, a focus on data and making that data public and available are very important. Yeah,
I think the issue of data is quite important. We are talking about different kinds of data that we have collected in the past. We are not talking about sort of survey data anymore. We are talking about much more real-time data that can be crowdsourced, collected by local informants, transmitted via SMS, and conveyed through the web, so that we can have sort of direct monitoring of what is happening on those markets. The issue of value chains, I think, is an important new concern. The issue there is, of course, institutions. The issue is contracts. The issue is producers' organizations. So it's taking us away, in a sense, from technology towards much more institutional construction, which are sort of dimensions that we may not have given enough attention to in the past. So Ian, do you want to take on?
I'm happy to. So I'm Ion Yerigaroglu, so I manage this organization called Capricorn, otherwise known also as the investment company for Jeff Skoll and the Skoll Foundation. And we do a lot of different things, but I'm here, of course, for agriculture. And coming to this from a completely different place, since coming into this as an investor. And our firm was founded to demonstrate that in a number of interesting areas we could both make a lot of money and also create a lot of good in tandem. So again, coming from a very different place. And it's not that natural for me to be here. It should be natural, but it's in fact family ties, since Alain has known me for 44 years. That's brought me here, even though it turns out that I have a number of colleagues from the Skoll Foundation and others that are here. So it should happen more often. Now, before I start, to say a few things about the project we have in Tanzania, I want to do a quick advertisement, which is in a different company. We have begun to image the whole globe every single day in high resolution. And it's everywhere, every single day. And there are enormous commercial applications of that, but even more importantly, and the company was in fact founded on this premise, is the hope that that can give us a very different kind of awareness for what's going on. And one of the most interesting areas is agriculture, because you can watch plants grow if you can actually image them every single day in a way that's very different than if you go to a digital globe and you buy data once in a while. So we can watch water move through hydrology and rivers. We can watch plants grow, as I said. We can watch in real time every single tree as it gets cut down. And a few weeks ago at the Skoll World Forum, planetlabs.org was launched, which is the side of this that makes that data available for common good applications together with analytics. And it's very important to have, in my view, a healthy response to that initiative. So for those who see applications for that data and those analytics, if you could visit planetlabs.org and express your interest, that will help make sure that the non-commercial applications of this stay at the forefront. So that was for the plug on data. In farming, I was challenged. Again, our firm is a little bit premised on doing unconventional things, and but we can't be wrong. At least we can't be wrong all the time, because we do have to, when we write a check, we do eventually have to get a bigger one back. And so if we don't do that, the music stops, right? So we have to make very, very good, very profitable investments. And I was challenged a couple of years back. We had done very little in Africa, and a lot of people were talking about agriculture. And we said, what could we do? And because we're check writers, we said, well, of course, we're going to invest in a larger farm. And We then looked at the problem and we realized that there was absolutely nothing to like about farming in sub-Saharan Africa. We literally could not define a single dimension on which a farm was attractive. The seed knowledge was poor, the infrastructure is terrible, the governments are worse. Frankly, the working skills and working culture is not particularly good. Land is expensive and there's lots of people everywhere that make it very fragmented. The weather is okay, the land is okay, but there's plenty of good land and weather in other places, and so forth. There's really nothing to like about it. So, and that's of course a result of the fact that there's been chronic lack of investment in those areas. And therefore, if you're just a relatively short-term, relatively small investor, it's very, very difficult to think of something that makes sense. So being hard-headed that we are, we said, we'll try anyway. And what we decided to do was to invest enough money in one area, in one valley, which is the Kilombero Valley of Tanzania, smack in the middle, that we could turn around many, if not all of those things, and make ultimately, over, let's say, a 10-year period, a profitable farming operation. And the whole point was to do it for food, right? So nothing export related. And we are now growing rice there. I guess we're in year 7. It is not yet a success of ours because we're not in year 10, we're in year 7. And it remains a very challenging experiment. But again, we only do things because we think they'll work, and so far our track record is good, so I think this one will work. It's a hybrid system where we found one of the very few contiguous pieces, about 5,000 hectares, that was not inhabited for some very specific historic reasons in the middle of a very productive valley. And we intended to farm that at large scale, but also work with smallholders. And so today there are approximately 6,000 smallholders which farm, in adjacent areas to the 5,000 hectares that we farm. And because we made very large investments in farming equipment, roads, infrastructure, mills, research on seed, imports, of course, we're relatively easy, in a relatively good position to extend a lot of those basic things to the smallholders. The core of the smallholder program, by the way, is essentially copied from the Indian rice intensification techniques and involves a lot of training. It does involve a little bit of equipment in the form of hand weeders and small Vietnamese combines that we rent out, but also bags of fertilizer and proper seed that we bulk up ourselves and make available to the smallholders. And of course, as you can imagine, there have been very dramatic changes to the smallholders' productivity, about from the typical sort of 1 ton per hectare to about 3 tons per hectare for those smallholders. And so long story short, it's not at all, I think it's quite different than most of you think. I didn't recognize myself in the slide of am I an NGO or am I a researcher. There was a 3rd or 4th category there that I wasn't in. The smallholder program, by the way, is done with support from USAID and Norfund in part. And it is limited to one valley, which is the Kilombero Valley, which is, by the way, a SAGCOT corridor of focus for Tanzania. But it's been an incredible experiment for us of what can you do when you put enormous intensity of money and effort in just one place with a hybrid system between sort of large-scale farming and smallholders. So really excited to continue all this thinking and progress. By the way, I know I ran out of time, but yeah, I wanted to say one thing on your questions, which I meant to have half the time be on, and I didn't even mention it. One of the most important things is, as we start, we're producing about 20,000 tons ourselves, and then the smallholders produce a lot more than they used to. So, I mean, we produce a lot more than the largest market trades in Tanzania, right? We're the largest grower of food in that area. And so these issues of elasticity and how are we affecting the markets are enormous for us. And I can tell you, we're very data-driven, very quantitative, and we understand absolutely nothing about the movement and the pricing of rice in Tanzania, and no one else does either. And so that is clearly an area where it impacts us very negatively to not understand that kind of science better.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. I think we need to explore more those business models that exist that can reconcile what large farmers and small farmers can do together in a cooperative fashion. There are some interesting examples across the world. There are some interesting examples in Brazil, where this is happening, in Morocco, in northern Senegal. So thank you. I think it's also creating openings instead of data. If actually the data you have can help us measure yields, that's a major contribution. We can crowdsource the price data, but the yield data are still a very big challenge. We can recognize biomass, but out of this to measure yields for specific crops. So if this indeed can happen, this would be a major breakthrough in terms of what large data can contribute. So thank you very much, Ian. Min, you want to go on?
Yeah. So I think I would start with the question about market and demand. Oxfam work in, I work for Oxfam America, but Oxfam is part of the bigger confederations with 17 different affiliates working in 90 countries. And we have a lot of different work in agriculture, but mostly on stable crops. And we're going to talk more about one of the most significant programs for us. I think it's similar, talking about system of dry intensification. Oxfam started with this program since 2000 or 2001, and now it's been expanded to about 10 different countries and reached more than 2 million farmers. And it has been incredible to see this happening in the sense that we believe in technology, but we also believe that technology is not the only solution, but it has to start with the real demand of the farmer, particularly very poor and smallholder farmer. So when we designed this program, we did think about scale and impact. So which come first? We need more impact or we need more scale? There should be some sort of balance. And how are we going to find a formula for determining this balance? We are NGO, we don't have a lot of resources, and the farmer, they have a lot of risks. They don't have the luxury to make a lot of risky investment. So what are we going to do? In each country, particularly in the country where we have a good relationship with the community and also good partnership with the government, particularly the Extension Department under the Ministry of Agriculture, we try to find a way that we build upon the existing capacity and the existing partnership rather than introduce something new, something completely strange to farmer and to the community there and also to the local extension worker, because it takes time to build trust, it takes time to organize farmer. In a lot of presentations I heard today afternoon, you talk a lot about understanding information, understanding how market behave, understanding about how technology diffuse, but not so much about understanding farmer, what going inside the farmer head, why they trust this agent, why they trust this farmer, rather than somebody else coming from outside. So building the farmer trust, building their confidence to adopt something new, and also making sure that we build the farm organization and improve the networking and the social capital within that particular group of farming community is very important for us before introducing any new technology. And we see that technology is more like a means to an end rather than an end in itself. So we came to Vietnam in 2006 after successfully introduced SRI, system of dry intensification in Cambodia. Why Vietnam? A lot of people ask that question because Vietnam already very successful and export a lot of rice. But there are 10 million rice farmers in Vietnam, and 90% of them are small scale and grow rice across of 5-6 different smaller plots, and they barely grow enough for themselves, for subsistence. So which is still very important for organizations like Oxfam to work with these farmers. We build in a lot of patience in our model. It's not 2 years, 3 years, it's a 5 and 10 years program. So we make the commitment very clear from the beginning that we're going to stay with you for a long time and we're going to weather the risks together. And we use the farmer film school model where we start building that lead farmer, as you say in the presentation today, or the core farmer, who's going to be the promoter and who also going to be the networker for promoting this SRI technique. And at the same time, farmer, after the whole crop season, learning this, in the following crop season, they divided themselves in a smaller group of 5 or 6, and they start extending collectively to other groups. So by doing that, we create two things. Not only create more collective brain or more collective knowledge among the farmer, but also reduce the risk. Because one farmer, when they learn something new, and when it's transferred to other people, they might not be able to transfer all the thing. But when 4 or 5 of them doing it together, they minimize the risk of individual failure in learning something new. And also very important, from the beginning, we invite a lot of academic people, particularly from national university and researcher, to accompany us along the course, so they are able to help us to explain why there is differences in the yield, why there is differences in the way that the soil quality has changing over time, so they can explain that to the farmer. And the other thing, that the government believe in evidence, the government believe in data. And Oxfam is not a research capacity, but we bring this researcher in. So when we talk with the Minister of Agriculture, we have the evidence, we have the data to convince the minister. And from the very beginning, we also invite the extension worker to work with us. So there is no secret in there, and we learn together how it works. And very important that we find every way to make the recommendation go straight into changes in policy. For example, about rice production, when SI is accepted and endorsed by the Ministry of Agriculture in Vietnam, that SI is innovation and allow Vietnamese farmers to adopt it. This is a very critical decision. It's also opened a lot of access for us to get public fund from the extension budget to allow farmers in other provinces to adopt SI. So we started with a very small base of 3,500 farmers in 2006. 4 years later, we reached 800,000 farmers. And just about a month ago, I received the report from Ministry of Agriculture that now they have 1.8 million farmers doing SI. However, it's only over about 366,000 hectares of rice, which is a very small. This is understandable because we focus on small, very small scale, very smallholder rice farmer. So the question for us now, and I also want to hear from other panelists and want to hear from this forum, is that how are we going to scale it up? How to get the support from the beginning so we don't have to wait 10 years to get the critical scale in order to have enough profit to keep this sort of innovation running. I know we run out of time, but just the final thing is very important that for the whole afternoon, I haven't heard much talking about the role of women farmer, which is very critical. And in our program, for the SI program, we really focus on women farmers because they are the one who work very hard. They are the one who go for innovation. We did the study in Vietnam, and it showed that after training on SI, one woman farmer would, on the average, promote SI to at least 5 to 8 other farmers. Guess what is the ratio for male farmer?
0.
Oh, better than that. 1 to 3. So it's more reason to even invest in women farmer. Thank you.
Well, thank you for reminding us of those dimensions. I think Oxfam has been quite innovative about technology, about using farmer field schools, about addressing the issues of risk, and especially using groups to kind of co-insure. when you're going to go into scaling up, you're going to face the issues of markets. And it's a little bit like what we are facing with our own RCTs. RCTs, randomized controlled trials, tend to be localized and relatively small. And yet, when we think about expanding, scaling up what we are learning out of RCTs, then we face up to the issues of markets. And that's why one of the common themes that we are discussing in this panel is how do we face up to the issues of market performance, market depth? What kind of reforms do we need to put forward in order to expand the capacity of markets to support efforts at scaling up? So David, would you like to finish?
Good. My name is David Ameya. I'm from AGRA, Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, sorry. Our headquarters is based in Nairobi, and we are spread in about 22 African countries. AGRA was founded in 2006 by Rockefeller and Bill Gates Foundation. We are a core part of Gates' agriculture strategy, and we have been operating for the past 7 years. Our main goal is to trigger a uniquely underline, because anywhere we go and we talk about green revolution, people look at the negative effect of green revolution and they jump on us. And we said, no, we are not just doing a green revolution. We are triggering a uniquely African green revolution that will transform African agriculture into a highly productive, effective, competitive, sustainable system that will ensure food security and lift millions of smallholder farmers out of poverty. Our goal when we started operating in 2007, I think they thought that 2020 was far away, so they set an ambitious goal to reduce food insecurity by 50% in at least 20 countries in Africa by 2020, double income of about 20 million smallholder farmers, and also at least put 15 countries on the pathway of attaining and sustaining a green revolution in Africa. The organization was established with some core beliefs. One, they believe that if we develop technology, both input and outputs, we will be able to increase agriculture productivity of smallholder farmers. So if you look at our operation, we work on both the input side, making available improved seeds, making available soil health technologies, extension services, making available farmers organization, mobilizing farmers to increase their farm production, and also the output markets where we are linking farmers to structured markets, giving them information, reducing post-harvest losses, and giving them technology so that the land productivity can be high. Also, one of the things that was one of our core principles was to develop an evidence-based enabling research policy, because policy is a critical component of African smallholder constraints, in productivity. So by developing evidence, in research policies, institutional and incentive to promote agriculture adoption, we will be able to increase and lift millions of people from poverty. And also to provide a platform where diverse constituents will be able to come together and discuss what works for African agriculture, and to form an alliance among smallholder farmers, governments, policymakers, researchers, so that we will be able to transform productivity in Africa. As you were saying, we see Africa in a different light. We see Africa as a shining continent. We see that there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of increasing opportunities happening in Africa. If you look at the population growth, people would think it's a problem, but for agriculture, we need, it gives us an incentive to do more. if you look at the youthful population on the continent, almost about 55 to 60% of the population in Africa are classified as youth, that you can tap their talent. You look at the discovery of minerals, oil and other things that are growing the cities and concentration of investment, and you look at the investment opportunities, it gives, impetus to smallholder farmers to produce more. There's an incentive. So we don't see it as a challenge, we see it as an opportunity. After working for 1.5 years, 7 years, we can see, when you look at the production charts, you will see a little blip, between 2007 to 2013, and my seed guy always said that is the Agra effect. And I said, no, that is not your effect. But we are seeing, in different spots that increase in Syria, is jumping from 1.5 to 3 tons per hectare. We are seeing that. We are seeing that adoption of, fertilizer and improved technology is going up. The challenges that we are finding is the market. And I think as we are talking about here, we have been doing a lot. And I just came from Ghana where the farmers were telling me that, in order to promote the input, we need to find a way to absorb their excess production. Because for the past 3 years, because the weather have been good, there have been excess production of maize, and the market cannot absorb it. But we have come up with different interventions, like warehouse receipt systems. As we were talking, if we are able to, give the farmers a guaranteed price, during the harvest time, give them an incentive to store. By giving them information, the M-Farm system that we have developed that is giving farmers price information, by forming farmers group and linking them to structured market like the supermarkets that are emerging in Africa, and also P4P, Purchase for Progress, we are absorbing a lot of, these things. We just finished a study, and Rockefeller funded it, on spoilage. They said, reduction of waste and spoilage. How we can come up with improved facilities for farmers to be able to store for long term. These are some of the ways that we are doing to streamline the output markets and to level the price frustration that we are seeing. So my thinking is that Africa is ripe for technology. From what we have seen, there is not a single silver bullet that can solve all the problems. But different research, different approaches in different areas can help us to tackle the problem and be able to contribute to the opportunities that are emerging in Africa. When you go to Ghana and you can see that, yes, there are deficiencies in rice, but they are overproducing in maize. You go to Tanzania, you go to Uganda, and you see what is happening. My thinking is that, we need such initiatives. Some of these research that we are doing, it may not work in all areas, but Africa have different ecological system, different people, different food system, different, people all together. And somewhere, somehow, some way, some of these research will work. And that is what we welcome. And that is how we see the Green Revolution, that it will happen in African own terms, in African own way, and it will be uniquely African. And we need the researchers so that we can adapt different ways and different means to address the diverse, people and culture and farming systems on the continent.
Yeah, I think we share your optimism that Africa is a land of opportunity. The context for agriculture is quite different now than it was before the food crisis. Prices have gone up. There are challenges with price variability, but there are new markets. There is effective demand. Cities are emerging. Supermarkets are coming in. Export markets are present regional trade is important. And so there are really new opportunities in agriculture. I think you are raising a very important issue here, which is to kind of elevate the game from kind of small issues to big issues, to raise the policy questions. And for us, it creates big challenges as to how methodologically do we use the tools that we know how to use for more micro issues to address those broader policy issues. At the national level, policy is a unique policy. It's hard to experiment with alternative policies at that level. So let me just go back to each of you maybe for 2 minutes and ask you to think Africa, think small farmers, and maybe the kind of duality and the links between small farmers and large farmers. Think of food and food security, and then think of markets, and sort of tell us what you would recommend in terms of research agenda. So we bring markets into the picture of the research agenda that we are going to have. What would be the priorities that you would recommend? Richard, yeah.
It's like being back in school again. Geez, the professor asks you the hard question. What I haven't heard today, and what I kind of regret with our first investment with Atai, and I'm really hopeful that we'll go into a next generation of funding for Atai, but we have very little information on livestock. And 20% of our investment going forward is supposed to be in livestock, and we have a good livestock strategy now. I think in terms of marketing, I think livestock are fundamentally different than staple crops with different challenges but different opportunities. We've been very successful in East Africa on dairy development, and dairy development has almost naturally, on its own terms, really opened up new market opportunities. And so just a small plug, I think as we go forward, we can't leave livestock out of the picture. It's so important for food security and income in Africa and in South Asia. And I think when we do that, though, I don't think we want to take sort of common wisdom that we've earned or understood through staple crops and automatically apply it to livestock. I think it's quite different.
Yeah. Jan?
I was not so familiar with the work that collectively is being showcased here, and I was really, really excited, blown away, I should say, with the crisp thinking of and the clear results of the randomized control trials. And I've, starting in operating a large farm in the middle of Tanzania, we've run across tremendous amounts of dogma, and frankly, much of that has not been useful for us. But, clear questions asked, well-designed, frankly, also somewhat larger scale experiments with clear results are incredibly valuable, and would love to see more of those, and certainly if there are some that are even more directly applicable to our context, those are fascinating.
Good. Well, we take the compliment with pleasure, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Ming?
Yeah, most of my work experience was around Asia, not so much in Africa. Tonight I'm going to Haiti, and then in 2 months' time I'm going to Ethiopia and looking at how, as an Oxfam, we can support smallholder farmer to adopt a system of land intensification and also a system of crop intensification for different crops. But I would like to offer just my thought for now, that in order to change from evidence to action, we need to think about how this action going to be translated into policy changes, because only policy changes would ensure transformative changes and long-term and structural changes. A little bit change here and a little bit change there with this particular community, and that community would not sustain for long term. So I like to see the research agenda of SIGA think more about how this action translate into policy changes. And also the balance of more investment for Africa may not be the only question, but the quality of the investment and where it goes. And we should think about the world where the large-scale farmer live together with a small-scale farmer, meaning that we might have large-scale farmer together equal to a cluster of many smallholder farmers working together and equally produce the same effect. And the final thing is that I would like the research to think about the farmer as a co-producer of knowledge and how we capture and how we encourage that knowledge for the future use. Thank you.
Yeah, I think evidence to action is policy for us, very importantly. I think what you have brought to the table quite importantly is the issue of behavior, that we should not forget about the actors and how they think and how they see the world and kind of the inner vision of things, which is quite different when we see it from their angle than the way we look at it from the outside. So this is certainly welcome. David, with your enthusiasm, we let it to you to conclude.
Yes, I think we have done a lot on the output markets, the outputs, the input wing of productivity. One of the things that we are facing is I concur what she said about the policy. If you are looking at market, regional trade, inter-regional trade, continental trade, deals with a lot of policy issues. Another thing that I would like to put across is the role of the farmers' organization. Collective buying, collective seller, gives farmers power, the bargaining power. I know that people talk about the old cooperative systems, but we don't have an evidence on what works and what didn't work. But AGRA is now hosting the Farmers Organization Support Center in Africa, where we are documenting and providing different types of services to different emerging farmers organizations. What is the role of farmers organization in markets? How do they do it both on the input side and the output side? If you look at fertilizer, the transportation, the handling costs, if we are able to organize the farmers who are having access to the fertilizer from maybe the port or the factory gates, how will it affect the cost? All these things we haven't really looked at it. So my thinking is that farmers organization, policy effect in markets are emerging areas that maybe we can put some resources in and study a lot about it.
So let me just thank the panel. You're all busy. The fact that you came to work with us and be with us is a compliment, so we thank you very much.